Tamoor, you gave Final Fantasy VII a 10 out of 10, which is essential on the GameSpot scale. It is the first 10 you've given, and it is what, GameSpot's 17? I don't, 18th?
Something like that.
Wait, no, because I think Disco was 16th, and then
Persona 5
Persona
Royale.
was 17th, and then you were 18th.
Yeah, 18. Yeah, first.
Anyway, so
first one.
do you want to sum up your review, just for background, like overall what you thought of it, why this game you feel is essential?
Oh, man. I don't know how to sum
as
up
quickly
that
as
review.
possible. I'll give you a sentence.
That review was, I know I've said this multiple times, but like that was one of the hardest things I've ever written, for so many reasons.
Your final line, like I think really like it feels profound that you say at the end of that review.
A lot of people,
like, a lot
in
of people
the comments
love that
too,
line.
noticed that too.
I've been trying not to read the comments because I'm terrified of what's
No,
in there,
they're
so-
super
They're very
positive. The
that's
comments are it's surprisingly positive.
At least for you two. I don't know about GameSpot. People always find something to complain about in GameSpot comments. So
Yeah, I mean, like it's a difficult game to talk about, but I can suffice it to say that I loved it enough to give it a 10. And like, there's something I've been thinking about what it is about it that made me push it, because obviously you all know that I also love Sekiro, and I reviewed that last year, and I gave that a 9. And I was like looking at Final Fantasy, and I was like, why did I give this a 10 like instead of a 9? What was it about it? And I think part of it is the nostalgia, and to ignore the nostalgia would be stupid. Like, I don't think you can do that. I think you'd be failing at your job if you ignored the nostalgia part of it and acted like it didn't have an impact on you. So I put a bit in my review where I said, yeah, it works as nostalgia does what nostalgia does to you, but it's important to notice that that it does more than that. And I think Jean-Luc is a testament of this. Same for a bunch of other people. If you listen to any other podcast, like the Kind of Funny Guys, Greg Miller was talking about it. Same for Blessing, I believe. Andy Cortez. There's a bunch of people who have never played the Final Fantasy VII original and are just like, this is unreal. And I think the reason it deserves a 10 is it executes on exactly what it wanted to be, but is what it wanted to be wasn't just a remake. It was like taking something that was beloved and remaking it in a way that is better than the original. Very few things can do that. We've had amazing remakes over the years. Shadow of the Colossus remake is fantastic. There's various other remakes that are good, but nothing that took the original source material and reworked it into something as good as this. People who are listening to this who are like inclined to complain are going to complain about things that are changed in the story. And yeah, it does change things in the story, and it sets up things to be very different in the future going on. And like, the problem I have with that mentality is like, I see a lot of people saying, how can you give it a 10 when they did X, Y, and Z to this thing and changed it? And my thinking is like, but it doesn't right now. I can't ding it for something that it hasn't done. What the game is just outstanding. It's phenomenal. It's this beloved story told in a way that feels modern and more human and more relatable and more like just heartfelt. It's a level of like nuance and writing that I just did not expect from. I'm gonna be 100% honest. I didn't expect it from Square Enix. I didn't expect it from Final Fantasy. I know I shouldn't say that because Ziv exists and Ziv is still like the exception. It was the exception. It was the one Final Fantasy game where if Haim was here, he'd be going mad. But like, that is the strongest written Final Fantasy game that exists. But again, like the mainline Final Fantasy games are created by a different team. They don't have the same writer, and the writing quality on those is subpar for me. Like, it's not good. It's archetypes, and they create interesting worlds, but there's things about those games that I just don't ever hit for me. Like, the dialogue is often miss for me. But in this game, every part of it feels like it lands, and it feels like it was really carefully thought of and executed on. Like, there's so many funny moments, so many lines of dialogue that are endearing, heartwarming. Yeah, there's the odd clunker, but it doesn't detract from the experience. There are moments where I thought this is a level of poignancy I never thought I'd get from Final Fantasy. There's lines where like the comedic timing on it is just perfect. Like there's and it's not just it's written as a good joke. It's written well, it's delivered perfectly, and then the camera angle, the directing behind it absolutely nails it. There's one line in particular which I won't spoil, which is like a character is dressed in a way that no one else expects and is very much aware of the fact that everyone else is like, why are you dressed like that? And the delivery of his line, which responds to the kind of like the incoming barrage of questions about the situation, it's flawless. Like I remember thinking that is like high level comedy standard delivery, and it's coming from Final Fantasy, which I didn't expect. But like, it's an incredibly nuanced story. It deals with, an eco-terrorist group, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that some people don't believe in their cause, and for a lot of the time the things that they're trying to achieve are hurting the people around them. And although sure, in the future it may pay dividends, there's a small chance that it might improve things, that you're constantly being reminded that this is a small group of people fighting a behemoth, and is there really worth in sacrificing so much for the small chance that you might change something? The people around you are constantly reminding you of that. The characters that are involved in that story are also reminding you of that. Tifa, for example, I mentioned it in the review, is like, she's constantly second guessing herself, and she's second guessing the cause. She's doing it not just because as a scripted thing. They show what she's thinking about. They show a character called Marlene, who's a little girl who works in a bar that she works at, and is like one of the main character Barrett's daughter. And like, you can see that some of her concerns are because of what she feels for Marlene and what she feels for the people around her. And it's such a nuanced way to think about it. And that kind of stuff is just, it's considered, and it fleshes those characters out in a way that the original just wasn't at all. And then there's like stuff like the combat, which I describe like as the perfect balance between action from like the 15 era and like Lightning Returns and all those kind of the Lightning series, and the classic Final Fantasy VII where you're just standing in one spot and issuing commands. There's like a perfect balance. It's the first time I described it as in my review that the action focus doesn't come at the expense of the strategy. It just feels so good, and they kept the materia system and they made it work well. The materia system is probably my favorite RPG upgrading system, because if for people don't know, like you get this gem which essentially encapsulates a magical ability, and then you use it and it levels up, and then you can take that gem and give it to any character, and it's not like that character is not proficient in it, because the experience that you've pumped into that gem and that magic, it carries over. So you can just turn your like melee fighter into a long range magician if you want to, and it just works so good. It's so free form. You can come at whenever you hit a roadblock with a character or a boss or something like that, you can just think about, how can I make this interesting and make it more kind of fun for me to mess around with the loadouts and see if I can figure out another way to come at it. That is fun. The music is unreal. It is, oh my god, this I have thought about the soundtrack is $80, and I constantly think about buying it. And like,
I will pitch in to buy that soundtrack.
Yeah, we'll pitch it in, we'll rip it and put it on Kazaa. It'll be fine. I was very, very happy that I found a version of it of the soundtrack that had been taken from the demo on YouTube, because when I was writing it, I like to try and get into the mindset of the game I'm playing, and I had that playing in the background, and like it makes you emotional. It made me emotional writing. Like, I was able to try and, the one thing I struggled with was properly representing my feelings about the game, but also making sure that I'm doing justice to the fans that love Final Fantasy VII. I wanted to make sure that like my fandom was obvious to them, so that they could look at me and my review as someone they can trust, but do it in a way that doesn't push it into the territory where people think that I'm not considering the things I'm saying because I'm so blinded by my love of it. And that balance is really difficult to strike. And like, I had that music playing, and there were moments where I'd like just listen to the music to try and find the words I wanted to say, and that orchestral soundtrack is so evocative. It's so well done. The motifs that it carries through, like they're they're so subtle at times, but then they build to crescendos, and whether it's like Sephiroth's theme or Aerith's theme or just like a random theme that is playing while you're wandering like a sewer district, it makes you listen. It's on, I don't want to say it's on par with Persona 5, because Persona 5 has a very distinct style and bop, and but like in terms of quality and thoughtfulness in production, I think it's there. It's one of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time, and that is in keeping with every other aspect of the game. Visually, it's absolutely stunning. It's one of the best looking games I've seen, and I don't put a lot of stock into like how good a game looks, and people have been pointing out, oh, there's low res textures in there, but I honestly, people pointing that out are doing that at the expense of everything else that looks amazing. You're looking
There's
at
low res textures in every game.
every single game. But like the thing that blows my mind is like they're looking at, people are looking at this door, which is like low poly, or like this flower, and in the background is this unbelievable vast city. There's like this massive plate above them in the sky that is blocking out the sun, and the moment you look at it, it's just like you get this feeling of oppression and feeling of like being unable to escape the misfortunes of living in the slums. Or like you look at a character like Tifa or Barrett, and like you can see like into their eyes and almost feel that they're alive, and like the way their hair moves, the way they, you know, just behave in movement, and that all is just lost and pushed aside because there's a flower that's got not enough polygons. And I'm like, you're missing the point here. It's just a
gamers.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not trying to hate on people. Like, people care about things to different levels, but there's so much beauty in this game. It's overwhelming at times. There's points where you're so high up in this tower and you're looking over Midgar, and it will stop you in your tracks, because it's like you see in the distance this horizon, and there's a desert beyond, and the light looks like it's filtered through this like sand dunes, and it's like covering the city, and you just look out there and you're like, this is unbelievable how good this looks. And it's just phenomenal to look at, and I don't think it's a, as people say, like, oh, low res, low poly, whatever. It's just one of the most stunning games I've ever seen, and I can't believe it's the kind of game. It's how you'd imagine a game would look this far into a PlayStation's life cycle. Right. It's stunning.
Did you play on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 Pro? Just out of curiosity.
I played on a Pro, and that Pro was putting in work. Like, there were times when I'm glad I had that soundbar, because I had to crank it real up to drown out the PS4's fans, but it will make your PS4 work. But that's just like one part of it. It's the characters that really, really, really will stick with you. And like I said it in my review, but this is why people love these characters. Like, you love them. People loved them back then, but there was a lot of like filling in the gaps, pouring your own ideas and thoughts into these characters that had been like created almost as caricatures, but like they're very thin when you look at them now. But I dare anyone to spend some time with Aerith and not just be like, I love her so much, and like just be around Tifa and look at her and just be in awe of how powerful she is. Watch her just like destroy the world around her with her punches and kicks. She's such a powerhouse. And then she'll come to you and have this moment of vulnerability that will just make your heart sink, and it's like having a close friend open up to you. And like Barrett, you see him, he's like, I described him as like a WWE pay-per-view character, because he's just screaming and he's always cutting a promo. But then you have a moment when he just picks up his daughter and says something to her, and it will just melt your heart. And like Wedge and Biggs and Jessie is a character that is just given no time in the original game, and you meet her and she throws herself at Cloud. She's like, maybe you'll be like, you know, my leading man, and she is very much horny on main. Like, everyone is
horny on main in this game.
But like, there's a moment where you do a quest and you realize you do a mission. I hate describing them as missions and quests because it just sucks the heart out of it. You go on, like, you do this job with her and you realize why she's like that. She had a dream, and it impacted her personality in a specific way, and then you look at her completely different from that point, and you're like, oh, I understand why you behave like this. And it makes you think about that character. Same for like Biggs as well. Like, Biggs is a character who like seems like he's just very charismatic, like cool, calm, collected soldier type. And then there's a line someone says where they're talking about someone else in their past, and they mention a name, and you're like, oh, wait a second, you connected to this, connected to this, and you were here doing this thing. And you're like, I did not expect you to have a role in this thing that's happening in front of me. And like even there's a small thing that I use to highlight why it's essential to try and do everything in that game. There's this mission where you go to a part of a city, and a character, which is a teacher, asks you to find a bunch of her students that are running around the city on a patrol. And you look at it, and even I remember going, great, it's basically a dynamic fetch quest. I need to run around this area and find these kids. And I did it. I found these kids. I returned them home. Some of them were trickier to find because there's enemies that you fight on the way, and they're in the area. And then a few missions later, I had to do a similar mission, which was like the same mission. The kids are off again, or you need to go and find these kids. And I was like, what is this? And then I found those kids. Every single one of those kids was wearing a wooden version of Cloud's Buster Sword on their back, because he had rescued them. He had become their hero, and now they were going around town just trying to be like Cloud. And that was like, I could have missed that easily, but that little bit of character development, and you could see the impact it has on Cloud. He's this cold-hearted character. He only wants money, but then he sees these kids who idealize him, and he's like, damn, I've got to pay attention to what's happening. And you can see him, like, he's thrust into these relationships that he doesn't want to start with, and he just can't escape them. And he's caught on a web of like humanity, and that's the most interesting part of this game. And like I said, like, there's a point where you meet Aerith, you walk through an area with her, and honestly, like, the music playing, speaking to her, like, I couldn't contain my emotions. I was like, I just burst out crying, because I was like, this is everything I wanted it to be. And like that specific moment, speaking to Aerith, it was like, I think it's one of the greatest game moments I've ever had. So I just love this game to bits. And it's important to once again reiterate that is enhanced by my nostalgia for the game. But I think if you even someone like who has no nostalgia for it can see the value in it. Yeah.
Final Fantasy
Jean-Luc can speak.
Jean-Luc as well.
Yeah, Jean-Luc too. Like, it's never clicked for him before. And he was telling me like the same, just like how much he was really enjoying.
So like the area.
Well, I mean, I almost like. I'm more interested to see what people think of this game who are nostalgic, because I feel like nostalgia is tricky, right? Everyone's quick to say, oh, this is just fueled by your nostalgia. But if you're nostalgia for something and they like mess it up or something isn't quite right, like those are the people that are going to notice, and those are the people that's going to call it out. It's not the people who are like passing fans. Like myself, like I'm going to play this game. I'm not going to notice that kind of stuff because like I'm not nostalgic. But that's why like hearing the fact that you're nostalgic and it's still it is more than what you expected and all that stuff makes me even more excited to play this game and more interested. But I guess just to kind of like move things along here, Jean-Luc, you're someone who didn't play the original Final Fantasy VII, right? And you're still really enjoying it too.
Oh yeah. I've never I 100% agree with everything Tamoor said, and I never played the original Final Fantasy VII. I have no nostalgia for it. The few Final Fantasies I've tried, I've bounced off of. 13 I thought was incredibly dull. 15 I liked parts of it, but then got bored of it pretty quickly. This I was expecting, like I was excited to try it, but I was like, not really sure how I was going to feel about it, and I just kind of wanted to know, what this Final Fantasy thing is all about, because it is that like one that everybody is so nostalgic for, and it is just it's so well done. The characters are like in that first, I played that first hour, I played like the demo, which is essentially the first chapter, and I remember being like, yeah, this is okay. I was kind of irritated at Barrett, and I was sort of like, I don't know if these characters are gonna work for me, but like if you felt that way the same way I did, I would say like you have to give it more time, because like almost immediately I feel like those characters start to like expand and develop more. And then like my initial impressions of Barrett as like, Tamoor said, who's just this very loud, boisterous person, like melts away when he interacts with his daughter, and even like his relationship with Cloud like develops, and it's this really like interesting, just like back and forth between them. I think the like way the story develops, it was so interesting, like because I was the only one in the office who like hadn't played the original, who was playing it, who got it early, and I just assumed that all of the like story stuff, all of these like added layers of like social commentary were in the original, and they aren't. Like they're kind of there, but they're like people being like, oh yeah, like that wasn't in there, and like they really didn't like dive into like dealing with the consequences of being, part of this like eco-terrorist group, and like the convictions of your choices, and sort of like the social hierarchy of this like corporation who's kind of oppressing this system. Like it's there, but apparently it's just not, it was kind of more surface level. And I was shocked because it felt so core to the story. It felt like, are you kidding me? Like this is what's making this story for me. And like, I was baffled that a lot of that stuff was just not in the original. Like it feels so necessary.
So quick question for Tamoor. So now this is obviously part 1 of 3 parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or multiple parts. How long is like if you take this section, how long is this section in the original game?
Probably about 3 hours.
Okay, so okay. That's
short.
Interesting. Okay. So there's a
short,
lot.
yeah.
More
I'd say 3
here.
hours is probably an overestimation, if anything. It might be like 2.
Ben has been playing it for the first time recently. He said it took him about 5-ish.
Okay,
That's what he said to me.
It's longer than I remember then, but it's a fraction of the story.
Yeah, because how long is the game overall? Like the when you're in Midgard, that's like only wait, did I get it right? Midgard?
Yeah.
Cool. Fake Final Fantasy fan here. Like how long is the game overall? Like once you get out of there, it's pretty long still, isn't it? It's like 80 hours.
The original, yeah. The original is like minimum of. The problem with that game, not problem, but the thing with that game is like it's got layers upon layers of buried stuff, so it can go for 100 hours if you wanted to, but like minimum is like 50 hours, 50, 60 hours if you're doing everything you can in the main path. But like this game is 40 hours based on a 3 to 5 hour stretch of the original. And like...
And it doesn't feel like they were just adding in filler. Like
no.
It all feels substantial. It all feels
it all feels
impactful.
It all feels essential. That's why I described it as in my review. Like it doesn't make sense that this wasn't here. It doesn't make sense how this story could have been told without this, because it just seems so crucial to the tale.
And it just plays so good. Like you said, I didn't like the combat in 15. Like it feels like they took a lot of lessons from the way 15 played and really applied it to this one. Like I think that combat, like if they finally like figured it out, like it feels like Square's been like trying to figure out how to like modernize Final Fantasy combat for years, and they've never quite hit it. And this feels like the first one where it feels good. It like just bouncing back and forth between characters and like queuing up the commands, and like when you figure out that system and you like have all of your characters' abilities set in the materia, and you are like planning and micromanaging your attacks and firing on all cylinders, like it's so satisfying because the combat's actually like pretty tough. Like if you're not doing a good job, you can die really easily, but then when you like figure it out and you nail it, it is like so satisfying.
Yeah, there's no like random. In the originals it'll be like you take 3 steps and you'll be in a random battle and you're fighting like constantly. This is way more conservative in the amount of fights you have, and because of that each fight is more in depth and like more meaningful. They're trickier. They feel closer to something like a mini boss. Every skirmish is a mini boss, and then there are bosses in between. But yeah, it demands a lot of you. But once you figure it out, it's this kind of satisfaction that you have in playing a Fire Emblem, a XCOM, that kind of strategic movement of things, and the satisfaction of watching your plans pay off in the way that you wanted them. And even that Persona style thing where you identify a weakness and then you exploit it, and then it puts that enemy on their backs, and then you further jump in. That kind of like the stagger system is just like that, where you apply a pressure once you exploit a weakness, it applies pressure to them, and then if you keep doing that, they're staggered, and it leaves them completely open. This doesn't have an all-out cinematic attack, but it just means that you can pile on the damage, and it feels so good when you do that, because you feel smart, and you feel like you've kind of like figured out a character, or figured out an enemy.
Yeah. In a way that like 15's never did. Like I just remember like 15 feeling a little like, I'm just spamming the button, I'm kind of going through the motions. Like it didn't quite click for me that way. Oh
no, Jake's gone.
Yeah,
Oh,
that
that's
happens. My camera's not meant for this. It's fine, I'll turn it back on soon.
But yeah, like it just like in 15 I just remember that combat being like pretty like I'm just kind of going through the motions and hitting the buttons, and this I felt like I'm constantly thinking about it. And even like 15's open world, there are elements of it I like, but I think it suffered from just like it took forever to get anywhere, and a lot of times it felt like filler. Like this feels I think the restricted nature of the environments really benefits the game. It feels like every area, it feels handcrafted. It feels like when you do the side missions, it's like these small little town areas that just feel big enough to feel fun to roam around in, but don't feel like too big where you're just like aimlessly wandering around in a way that I feel like about a lot of open world games. It has huge Yakuza energy. Like you and me were both saying that, like both in the structure, but then like you mentioned the humor is like, it does. I don't know if that's what they did, but it feels like they took some lessons from like the way Yakuza fuses like its super serious tone with its like jokey like comedic moments, and it feels like they nailed that to me. And that's coming from like a Yakuza fan first, not a Final Fantasy fan. Like I know the original game also had its goofy moments, but something about the way they deliver it in this one. It works. It doesn't feel like irritating in the way that I've played other JRPGs where like it's just like, oh, this character is trying to be funny but just comes off as really obnoxious. Like that doesn't happen in this game.
There are parts in the original where the goofier parts are actually, by modern standards, would be described as problematic. And
oh sure. Yeah.
Those are in this remake, but they are handled in, I don't know, everyone's is different, but I would describe it as progressive. I would describe it as smart. I would describe it as like
very well done.
Very well done, and unexpectedly like very, very respectful. There's a moment which could have been in the old game would have been a lot of think pieces and Twitter complaining. In this game, I felt uplifted by it. I saw it and I was like, I can't believe they said that, and that is exactly what a lot of people will be wanting to hear. Is it what happy to hear?
Is it what the guy said at the very end of the cloud?
After the unexpected.
Sorry, we got to move on here.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, but that line stuck with me as well.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I do want to mention that next week you guys are going to do a spoiler cast, which will go up in this podcast feed. So make sure to check that out. And actually, before we move on, Lucy, I was curious if you are planning on. Do you have experience with Final Fantasy VII? Are you planning on playing this? Like, I kind of want to know your background because you enjoyed Final Fantasy 15, right?
I did, but I didn't finish it because of Chapter 13, which sucked.
Yes.
And I never finished it, even though I know they patched it. I'm a big Kingdom Hearts fan for my sins, but I really enjoyed the demo for 7. Hearing you guys talk about it, reading Tam's review, listening to Greg and talking to Greg about it, I'm really pumped to play Remake, and I was actually debating whether or not to start Persona 5 this close to it, but I think Persona is one of the games that I can just do in the background, because I feel like I'll finish Final Fantasy, and if I time it right, that's when the newer story stuff in Persona will be coming in, so it's like a nice little
segue.
Yeah, things I can play at the same time. No, I'm super excited to play it, and I have no fan affiliation really with Final Fantasy. Like, I love 12. I've been to a few of the concerts. I liked 15. Didn't really care for the other ones that I've tried. But I do want to play 8 and 10. 13 is the one I'm referring to there. But no, jazz to play 15. Jazz to play 7 Remake. I've got 15 on the brain.
Sounds like you and I are in the same boat,
Yeah.
except I'm not a Kingdom Hearts fan, and I
You love anime.
want to make sure everyone knows
You love
that.
anime.
I
Make
love
sure
I
everyone
love
knows
Kingdom
I'm not
Hearts,
Kingdom Hearts.
but this is the game that Kingdom
Yeah.
Hearts wishes it was. Like,
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That is fair.
All right. Well, I think that's a good enough point to wrap up this Final Fantasy VII review discussion. If you want to hear more, tune back in next week. Like I said, in this podcast feed, Jean-Luc is going to be doing a spoiler cast, so make sure you finish the game, obviously, but keep an eye out for that. Should be more good discussion about the game, but let's move on to listener questions.